Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Corey Hesser, and I am from Kirkwood Corporate Training. And as you are well aware, today we are with Celina Peerman, who is presenting on critical thinking. A lot of you probably already know Celina, but for those of you that do not, she serves as an organizational behavior specialist with over 27 years of experience from frontline to senior level positions in a wide range of industries and organizations. Her style has been described as dynamic, noting the ability to draw in even the most resistant attendees through real-life examples and humor. Today's session is a shortened version of what Celina is going to be presenting on April 21st during our Flexible and Innovative Training, or otherwise known as FIT. That session topic is critical thinking, upgrading our judgment, problem solving, and decision-making toolbox. So if your business is part of the FIT program, please make sure to reach out to your contact to get your seat confirmed. Or if after today you want to bring Celina into your organization, you can reach out to Kirkwood Corporate Training. So without further ado, let's get to why we are here today. So Celina, I am going to hand it right over to you.
Super. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we have none of those grouchy people here today that you just mentioned in my bio. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out. So your biggest challenge for the next 25 minutes or so is to forget about all the other things you're multitasking on while you're listening to this. Is that possible? I don't know if it's possible today, but please feel free to use the chat. We'll welcome questions at the end, and you're welcome to post those all the way along. I'll catch them if I can as we're going through it, or I'll add them in at the end of our time today. But this is really us right here. You, me, a couple dozen other people, or who's ever watching this later. But this is really your think time. This session and the upcoming session that we have for the FIT program is really about what goes on in our brains. And so I want to give you a couple of excerpts of that today so that if you're not able to join us for FIT, you've got some walk away key things to take with you today. If you're able to join us, or I can come visit you another time, I would love to be able to expand on this, but let's give you some things to work on today. The hard part about this is we're going to think about thinking. And that literally takes some brain power. So let's look at what that means for us here. I'm going to go ahead and go to a screen share. We're going to kick this off today and hopefully give you some things to take away with you. Consider this: while good judgment is important to us, right? So if we use this quote here, with good judgment, little else matters. Without it, nothing else matters. And it's from one of my favorite books on judgment by Tichy and Bennis. And while the book has been out for some time, I love the lessons that it helps us think about. Poor judgments end up in the headlines all the time. Good judgment doesn't even get noticed because we just take care of what we need to take care of. So what does that mean for us today? This particular session called critical thinking, right? So upgrading our judgment, problem solving, and decision-making tools for our toolbox. We recognize some differences between thinking, judgment, decision-making, problem solving. And that's what we want to focus on for today. What are some things you might know already? You know, when someone you work with starts walking towards you and says, "Hey, Marla, I need to tell you something I just did." And you think to yourself, "Oh, okay. Wow, what comes next?" So if in that moment your gut just told you, "Oh, what did you just do?" you might have some experience with that person in questioning their judgment. There might be somebody else who walks up to you and says, "Hey, James, I got to tell you something." And James goes, "All right, tell me," because you're comfortable with their judgment. For us, no matter what our professional role is, making good decisions matters. And when we make many of those decisions, it brings around what we call this umbrella of judgment, our overall ability to make good, considered decisions. Now, if you happen to do an internet search on how many decisions on average does a person make every day, it's like 35,000 decisions. So you should be exhausted by this point in time. You've made already thousands of decisions today without probably realizing most of them. But when we have to think critically to solve the challenges in front of us, to make decisions about how do we get work done, where do we take our organizations, how do we build our team, this becomes really important. So let's break that down a little bit. By definition, thinking is cognition, the process of knowing. These are our brain functions that support thinking, understanding, and the process of information. Notice this is different. So sensation is taking everything in through our senses. If you really consider, everything we know about the world around us comes in through our senses. Once it gets to the brain, we have to process it. That's what gets filtered through in terms of our perception. And then for our purposes, thinking is then, what do we do with that information? And our brain takes in so much stuff, has to process it, sort it out, and then make some decisions. What does that mean for us? That they're really different types of thinking. Critical thinking is, for our purpose today, really thinking about discernment. Critical thinking skills are being able to distinguish and identify and analyze information, sources of information, and how we use that information as what do we apply it to. Critical thinking is all about discernment. Strategic thinking is big picture. If you hang around me long enough, I'm a strategist at heart. I love trying to figure out why Netflix is here and Blockbuster isn't, and how organizations set strategy and figure out what comes next. So strategic thinking is being able to see and understand the circumstances outside of your scope. We might think about strategic plans, about how we position our organization as part of the environment and where it competes. But it also means understanding how your work fits into the wider picture. So thinking strategically in your role, you're looking at it from a bird's eye view or a drone's eye view. Tactical thinking is getting some stuff done. These are your action items. You might know them as your KPIs or your dashboard items or your balanced scorecard or your goals and objectives. This is taking that big picture and rolling it into, what do I need to get done today? What do I need to take care of this morning or this afternoon or by the end of the week? Tactical thinking is taking that big picture and putting it into actionable items. You'll recognize problem solving. This is where we're trying to resolve dilemmas, where something is not working or working as well as we would like, or has created a situation in which we identify a dilemma. So we exercise different thinking parts of our brain to be able to resolve problems. And I want you to think about innovation. These are the 5 types of thinking that we're focused on. And when we think about innovation, it's new and novel. Being able to see something, have a vision that nobody else may be able to see yet, or being able to take different parts of the information, combine it, and come up with a new application. These are just simply 5 examples for our purpose today. Yet for your investment of time, could you pick one of them that you're like, oh yeah, I've really focused on that, and that's something I'm really proud of, that I'm doing pretty well, or maybe it's one you've set some goals on, or you've done some reading about, you've really worked at building your skill sets. Often I talk about building thinking muscles for a strategic stretch or a tactical approach, or learning how to be more innovative or solving problems. Different types of thinking. Consider today which one you might want to learn more about. In the 5th session, we're going to go through these in detail. But for our time today, what maybe is one you haven't given some consideration to lately? Let's look at a couple of definitions, because one of the sections for our workshop is really around how do we problem solve within the environment we're in. So I mentioned the definition of judgment a few minutes ago, the ability to make considered decisions or sensible solutions. It's more than one decision. It is an overall, I mentioned the word umbrella, this bucket of decisions that we make. And did they go well or did they not go well? Decision making is that act or process of yes or no, this or that. of choosing in the moment between options. Problem solving is that process of finding solutions to difficult or complex issues. One of the areas that I often work in as an organizational psychologist with leaders in particular is that we have taught for many, many years in the business curriculum that if you have a challenge, identify the core issue, generate a whole bunch of solutions, pick the best one and implement it. Follow up and see if it worked. Well, what we recognize today in our complex systems within our organizations, there are often many more dilemmas than we recognize, where a dilemma is not easily sorted out, where there isn't a clear yes or no decision. So it really takes those problem-solving skills and innovation to be able to see it in a new or transformative way to solve something that we just didn't know before. And I want us to look at this always in context. So we could take just simply those definitions today, but I want you to think about your environment. Now, these are not either one an ideal state. On the left-hand side, you probably recognize that there are all sorts of ways to draw an organizational chart. But I want you to consider today how decisions get made in your organization. Who has what level of authority? And how do you work through thinking processes? Do you rely on somebody for their expertise? Do you rely on somebody to make a decision because of their formal power by title or by responsibility? What does that look like? And at what level are those judgments allowed? So maybe at level number one, you can make a decision up to a dollar amount, and then your manager can make a decision up to a dollar amount. What I want you to consider for today is, how do decisions get made? Are they centralized or decentralized? Are we really formal? We have lots of procedures, SOPs, change orders, where decisions are very formal and documented, or are they more laid back and we just do them when we need to do them? It depends on your department. It depends on your type of work. It depends on the organization itself. Now, the right-hand picture is not an ideal state, but it does shake up our thinking a little bit to just understand how we work within an organization to get work done. Who makes what decisions? How do you resolve problems? Do you resolve them in your team, or do you call in somebody? How do we build good judgment and decision-making skills in our teams? How do we help them think critically about information that they have? One of my favorite ways to look at that these days is the fact that we have more data than we've ever had before. But converting that data into usable information is where those critical thinking skills come in. How do we take that data and transform it into things we can actually do something with, make good decisions based on that data? So it just gives us a pause this afternoon. Consider for a moment in your organization where decisions get made. Who holds what authority? Do we exercise good judgment or poor judgment, and on what topics? And how do we communicate across our teams how decisions get made here? Some reflection questions for today. And if you want to comment on any of those, drop a note in the chat and share something back out with us. How do decisions get made? How do we build, right, those decision-making skills coming out of that thinking set so people make good decisions? They exercise good judgment because they understand the skills it takes to think critically, strategically, tactically, problem solving, and innovatively. Okay, so what does that mean for us today? Something you can take away with. These are some of my favorite. I am offering you 8 errors today. There are like over 300 documented in the research, which is a little overwhelming. Once you hear these 8, you're going to be like, these show up all the time in our conversations. They are some of my most fun and lively examples from a training standpoint, because we all do them. So as I go through them, I want you to pick maybe 1 or 2 that you go, oh yeah, Celina, I already did that like 3 times this morning. Share that out with us. Own it, because I'd rather have you recognize it and be able to reverse it and be more aware next time not to do it. So let's look at some of these. False consensus. You know what false consensus is? I am in leading a staff meeting and all of you are on my staff. It'd be a big staff, but we're all in this meeting and I propose to you a number of decisions that I want to make. And so I've told you what they are and no one says anything, like crickets. Well, my error in thinking, remember, these are not goals. These are errors in thinking. My error is, well, no one said anything, so everybody must agree. False consensus. Just because someone didn't speak up, there might be another reason. Confirmation bias. I knew that was going to be the answer. And it gets closely related to what we also call hindsight bias. And what this means is maybe there's somebody on my team that keeps taking some risks more than I'm comfortable with when it comes to safe working behaviors, but I just can't quite catch it, or they make me nervous and I'm just not sure. So maybe I'm in my office and somebody walks in and says, hey, so-and-so just took that forklift into a pole. And I think to myself, here's the error. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. They've been making poor choices and I'm sure they did it. Now, hindsight bias is, see, told you that was going to happen. Really? Because if you'd known it, it would have been really helpful for us to prevent. Now, let's say my employee, of course, is going to be okay in this scenario, but if I go out to do the investigation with this idea in my head that they're already guilty, I'm going to conduct my investigation with the bias that I'm really only going to look for data or evidence points that confirm what I already know. I knew that was going to be the answer, which is why it is so important in our root cause analysis and our investigations, anytime where we've got a process in order to minimize variance or maximize uptime, that we follow the process we have, because so many times we're trying to solve for root cause and we go in and skew the process because we've already got something on the brain of what caused it. Escalation commitment, I have watched for many, many years. And one of the areas that often shows up is in with leaders. So let's say as a leader, I make a decision and darn it, we're sticking to it no matter what else happens. So the more you push back on me, like, Celina, this is not a good idea. There's new data in, our market has shifted. We've already spent way too much and it's still not working for us. The more you push back, the more stubborn I get. Again, not goals, errors. So my commitment escalates the more you push back. We're sticking to it. And despite new data, maybe the decision was made to the best of our ability, but business circumstances have changed. We've experienced some of that in the last couple of years, which also then becomes the cousin to sunk cost error. What does that mean for us? Well, we've already spent $150,000 on this. Let's keep going. If it's not working now, it's not going to keep working later. And so we don't want to give it up. So we keep spending more money on something to make it work when the data keeps telling us that this is not our best pathway. Path of least resistance. Oh, it's just easier. I don't want to go through the red tape of getting a new vendor approved. Let's just use this one more time because I don't want to deal with something else. Path of least resistance. Couple more for our consideration today. Groupthink. Well, everybody else thinks this too. We grew up with maybe the saying in our families, like, well, if everybody else is going to jump off the plank, are you going to too? Groupthink is when we don't push back and we accept the status quo without asking really important questions of, are we sure? And have we looked at this a different way? Now, in my own world, my husband somehow 29 years ago realized that sweeping generalizations are an absolute pet peeve of mine. And they sound like this. They always, really, always, they never, really, never. He learned that those irritate me, so now he just does them on a regular basis. But for all of us, first shift, always, really, always. Third shift, never, really, never. Errors in our thinking that limit possibilities. Minimization, it's no big deal, when really it is. And now it's going to explode on us later. Or maximization, making a big deal, taking something small and making it a big deal. These today are just things I want you to consider. Where does your thinking go awry? Maybe you jump to conclusions. Maybe it's assumptions. Maybe it's not pulling the data or pulling the wrong data. We need professionals in our organizations today that can sort through the muck, that can pinpoint what do we need to do, when do we need to do it, and what's our best way to accomplish this. Watching for errors is one of our best ways to work on that immediately. So maybe today it's just those 8 errors. Maybe you pick one of those and watch for them in your next meeting this afternoon. I think that's fun. Maybe you don't know if it's fun, but it really is fun. Sit in your next meeting with these notes and go, oh, there's one, there's one. We might even create a bingo card out of these. There are many, many more, but these are some of my favorites. So let's say, what can we do with this? There are some things that help us get out of our brain. When it comes to the different types of thinking, sometimes we need to let our mind wander. We just need some think time. We can't think big and bold when we're in the weeds and in the trenches and in the details. Sometimes we just need some think time. Sometimes our timing is not the best. So just because an idea works today doesn't mean it'll work 6 months from now. And just because an idea didn't work a year ago doesn't mean it won't work now. Sometimes we do need to dig deeper, get into those details, figure out what's really going on. But there's also something that comes with judgment and gut instinct, which we'll talk about in the upcoming session, where if your gut is telling you don't push on this right now, it might be telling you that for a very good reason. Sometimes when you're in the details, though, you can't see the error. So if you've ever been working on something really detailed, whether it's on a machine or your computer or some portion of your work, and you can't find the error, sometimes you just got to walk away from it, come back, you're going to see it in a new way. When you come back to it, you go, oh, it's right there. Why didn't I see that before? Because your brain actually rewired as you walked away and came back. We also need to watch for what's sacred in our organization. Sometimes we get rooted in traditions, and that's the way it has to be because that's the way we've done it. And I want us paying attention to what are those patterns in our organization that are deemed sacred that we have a hard time pushing against. Now, I'm going to push on them a little bit, but I want us to at least be able to identify them. You know, 6-year-olds in this world, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, kids at all ages just have an advantage over us adults. They see the problem without the filters that we have learned to add. And I want us to see the problem in a new perspective. What are we trying to solve for? What are we trying to think about? Because we can't solve it with the same thinking we created it with. And at times we need to look to something different. What would that mean for you? Sometimes it's not even in our industry. There was a Baldrige Award given out a number of years ago for a concrete company in the Northeast that wanted to compete differently in its market space. And every other provider of concrete in their market always arrived late. They didn't have to, they all showed up late. And this group decided they wanted to do it differently. So to update and improve their delivery processes, they didn't go study a new concrete company in the area because they would have seen processes that looked just like theirs. They studied a nationally known pizza chain that you would recognize because they deliver in outstanding ways. They figured out what a delivery system looks like, no matter what is being delivered. Sometimes we need to look in other places, and the best things today, we have to be able to get great ideas from anywhere. Now, they may not look the same when we adapt them to our organization, but there's learning to be had in the process. Couple more as we wrap up our time together. Sometimes when we're stuck or we're trying to work through a problem or a situation where thinking is just blocked, sometimes we need to rearrange the factors or the order. I love working things backwards because you're going to see things in a different perspective when you walk it back the other direction. I also know I tend to fall in love with ideas. Anybody here ever fallen in love with ideas like this is the best thing? And I can feel it in me when I have fallen in love with an idea. I am ready to shout it from the mountaintop. I've also learned somehow over the years, I need to hold it back right there because usually I'm going to go right off that mountaintop with that idea. And it always, even though I convince myself sometimes it's not true, it is always better when I give it time to fester a little bit. When I get other perspectives, I make that idea better. But I have to be careful not to fall in love with it. And I really do believe a lot of the solutions for our teams and our companies to work through the challenges we have in front of us are to simplify, not make it more complicated. Sometimes when we need to come up with new or novel, it does not mean added complexity. Look for ways to simplify something, and you may be surprised what that gets you. We do have to stick to it. We need to be persistent, recognizing again that timing may not always be ideal, but what can we learn from the process? So I'm excited that as we look at these items, it just recaptures for us today, what does this look like for you in your role? Look at the work you need to do. What kinds of different thinking are you counted on for? And when does your brain help you? And when does it not help you? And what might be some of the things you can consider to shake up your thinking a little bit, see it in a different way, simplify it, reorder it. Look at some of those practices where it may help you understand this is what we need to do differently and not get stuck in some of those errors. All right, so I see some notes. I love the comments that have come in about claiming those errors. Look at that, right? Some of those that came in there. I'm going to invite Corey back with me. And as we bring all of this together, Corey, when we looked at this topic and developed it as part of this program, it really came out as some feedback from employers of just need my employees to think through something, right? Got to hone this ability to make great decisions because our organizations are counting on us to lead us forward and to do this better. So I love being able to share some ideas with all of you today. And Corey, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Celina, for presenting today. I absolutely love that you mentioned the action item of, see it from a kid's perspective. So I love that. So thank you. As we are wrapping up, I just want to advise that we are going to be starting a Q&A. So if you do have any questions, now would be a great time for you to start putting them in the chat. If there are any questions, I'll make sure to read those for Celina to answer. And also just kind of an FYI, after the Q&A, if you would please stay on briefly just to fill out a quick 3-question poll for today's session. That would be beneficial for the continued improvement of Kirkwood corporate training and also for Celina moving forward. All right. So let me see if we have any questions, Celina.
Angie, I appreciate your note. Go count all those thinking errors in your meeting. Everyone's going to have really good meetings this afternoon.
I know,
I'm convinced. I'm creating a bingo card now with a bunch of thinking errors. We're going to do that.
Oh, all right. We'll just give a few more seconds. So you covered a lot of material today, Celina. It was fantastic. So
fun to do. And it's always good for me. Every time I go back into this material, I'm like, oh, I just did that one this morning, didn't I?
Yeah, I'm looking
always
forward to
something we can work on.
Yes.
Love it. I love it.
Well, I don't have anything popping in, Celina, so I will go ahead and push out the poll. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. We appreciate you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Corey. We'll see you all later. Take care. Stay safe. Be well.